Welcome back to the show. Dana and I are giggling because we are trying to avoid, well, it's not wardrobe malfunctions. It's more about making our skin happy, and the amount of
Oh God. Yeah. Like, you're talking about trying to wear wool sweaters and I'm like, oh yeah, I gave up on that years ago. Too
yeah,
scratchy. Yeah.
I know. And it's like, anyway,
I know.
if this is the biggest problem I have today, I mean, life is really good. You know
There
what I
you go.
mean?
I know. I'll find the perfect sweater online. I'm like, oh, this is so great. And then I read the description and it says wool and I'm like, damn it. Damn it.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
not. I think I'm just not. I think it's just. Yeah, I think I'm a cotton girl.
Yeah.
Speaking of cotton,
Hey, that's a think about how soft baby animals are.
yes,
And then fawns
yeah,
are baby
yes,
deer, which
yes.
leads us to talking about the fawning response in trauma. How is
The
that
fawning
for an
stress response.
association? Yeah, yeah.
So, as usual, our community members, our Marvels, really bring up wonderful points because they themselves
Mhm.
like to split hairs.
Yeah, yeah.
So we are all splitting hairs together, which then another one of our community members said, oh, it's like a split end. Ha ha. And I was like, oh, that's really funny.
There you
Okay. Anyway,
go. Yeah.
but we were talking about the difference, and Dana and I were really kind of evaluating the difference and exploring the difference between fawning as a stress
Mhm.
response and masking.
Yeah.
And we were like, what are they the same? What purpose and function
Right.
do they
Right.
serve, et cetera? So we thought we would actually just really explore this together
Mhm.
because Dana and I, as we are doing more digging, are realizing that we belong in a forest as
Oh my God, that's great. Yeah, we need to live in the forest with all of the fawns and all the animals that are placating people and trying to be
yeah.
apologetic and saying I'm sorry every other word. And people pleasing is
Yeah.
my favorite.
So for those of you, let's kind of go back. So up
Mhm.
to this point, and I'm sure these other additions have been,
Yeah.
they've been around for a while, but most people have heard of the stress response as fight or
Mhm.
flight,
Yeah.
right? I take off or I
Mhm.
stay and I fight. And
Yeah.
those look different. Fighting could be arguing, fighting could be doing and fixing, fighting could be leaning in, right?
Yeah.
Flighting is avoiding.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there have been more additions
Yeah.
with fawning as being added to the fight, flight, freeze,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Freezing, obviously, like I'm a deer in headlights,
Tonic
literally,
and
right? I'm
yeah. Yeah.
frozen. I
Plain
don't do
dead. Some
anything.
animals will play dead. That's like freezing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I think the kiwis are like no longer in existence because one, they don't fly, two, they
Oh.
hop, three, they can't see, and so whenever they get in trouble, they freeze, and so they've been eaten.
Oh. Yeah.
But there was no predatory mammals
Yeah.
forever. That's why they didn't have to. They evolved that way. Anyway,
It-
that's
yeah. Yeah.
clearly I do not have an ADHD brain.
No,
Let's come back to the situation.
freezing can be adaptive because there are a lot of predators who will not eat something that's already dead. So freezing is an
Yes.
evolutionary response. And if a raccoon or a possum is being chased by a predator, they'll freeze, and then the predator loses interest. So I
Yes.
suppose if you have a predator that doesn't care if you're already dead, you're going to get eaten anyway, like a bear or something like that. That's like awesome. I don't have to kill this thing now. I can just eat it.
Right.
But yeah,
Cool.
yeah. So it is always considered one of those evolutionary responses. But this fawning thing, something maybe in the last 10 years or so that I haven't seen it
Yes.
around that long.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the difference between fawning and masking.
Mm-hmm.
Because while they might look the same on the surface,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they serve different functions. And
Yeah.
and Dana and I, at this point, we're in the forest as hair splitters. I don't know what we're doing in the
No,
forest,
because
but
you were describing like fawning response, and we're both like, oh God, I do that, I do that, I do
oh,
that. I think
check,
women
check.
probably do that more than men do in our culture. But
Yeah.
masking, I think it's a good delineator, because to me, masking, I do think of as a larger umbrella idea, but it is good to split the hairs, because masking really is. Think about the word masking. You're trying to hide something. So you're hiding your neurodivergence, right? So why are you
To fit
hiding?
in.
Yeah, to fit
Yeah.
into the dominant culture, which is not
Yeah.
neurodivergent. So you're trying to change who you are to fit into how other people are. So you can lose aspects of self, right? If you've done that long enough,
Hmm.
then what you need to do to fit in, and then you're like, well, who am I? And you reach adulthood and you don't know who you are, because you continually done and acted in a way that wasn't who you really are, but who you thought would fit you in. So masking, that kind of makes sense, right? That's the old Greek tragedy. Wear the mask of the character
Hmm.
you want to play, and you can live into that. Fawning, on the other hand, is, as you were reading and we were looking at prior to starting taping, is,
A stress response aimed at ensuring safety
yeah.
by pleasing others.
Mm-hmm.
So usually it arises when we perceive some kind of threat or harm. And that's not just physical. I mean, that can be
Yeah.
social and emotional uh, um, fear of
Mm-hmm.
of harm in those categories as well. The idea, though, of usually people pleasing or avoiding conflict
Mm-hmm.
or suppressing your own needs in order to maintain harmony,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
safety.
thinking years ago when I was a kid, and my mom, I think I've shared her before, was an alcoholic, and we get dragged out to go to dinner with her. Me or my sister, we alternated weeks, just to give you an idea of how awful it was. And she'd want to go into the bar after having dinner. I'm like 16, right? And then just sit there, and people that are alcoholics like to sit at the bar for hours and just do nothing but sit at the bar and drink. And I'm like, oh. So fawning for me meant I didn't like it. I hated being there. I didn't want to do it, but I didn't want to cause a fight, because having a fight with mom was a bigger problem than if I just sat there and gutted it out and
Yeah.
smoothed and got it over with, right? So that is like it's a decided way to go, a route to go to create less conflict, for example, right?
Yeah.
So that you could say it's people pleasing, but in that particular scenario, it sort of has a trauma component wrapped in there. But oftentimes you feel like you have no power or control, and that's the only thing you can do, is just decide to sort of smooth the waters, right? If you felt more efficacious, today I'd have my own car. I'd call an Uber. I'd be like, I'm not even going to go to in the bar with you. But when you're 14 or 15 or 16, you don't have that at your resource. So that sense of, what do I need to do to stay safe? What do I need to do to keep keep the situation okay? So there's that placating. There's that people pleasing. Now, you mentioned earlier too, there can be some overlap. Like I can people please as a way of masking, like someone says, do you want to do X, Y, or Z? And I really don't want to, but all the neurotypicals are doing it. So I say, sure. And then you've kind of got both going on. I think that's where some of the confusion lies. But to me, the fawning is there. To me, there's more of a deliberate way of keeping the water smooth. And we do see this a lot in neurotypical folks who've been traumatized also. Just try
Yeah.
to make everything go along with and make it okay. And then you ask them, what do you want? And they're like, no, what do you want? This is the proverbial, what should we have for dinner? Oh, I don't know. What do you want? Never like, never check, because you don't want to be like, have you pick something. And then the other person might be not like it. And then you're sitting there the whole time like, oh, I didn't make them okay. And you feel like you're in danger because everything isn't okay. Right.
Yeah.
That's more of that fawning from what I'm reading in that example. Right.
Yeah, and that, fawning, because this really sounds more like a trauma response or a
Mm-hmm.
response to complex trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is more maybe subconscious. Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't realize necessarily that you're doing it because you're doing it to survive,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Versus masking, which can be a conscious choice.
Yeah.
I need to fit in here or want to fit in here. So I'm going to suppress X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to stim.
Right.
I'm not going to talk
Yeah.
about elevators from the early 1900s. Whatever.
Whatever
this
your
is,
interest
right?
is, because
Whatever
people,
it is,
Yep.
you know. And that idea, though, is because I think you can lose in both situations. You can lose a sense of yourself, right? In fawning, you're focused on meeting others' needs and expectations to avoid the conflict or avoid danger or avoid a situation. And in masking, while you're focused on yourself, you're hiding yourself in order to fit in
Belong.
right? You don't want to draw negative attention. You don't want to be judged or mistreated in some way, right? And so both are suppressors of your identity.
But you can also say that the masking is like to fit in socially, because if you're alone, you don't have to mask.
Correct.
Fawning is more trying to smooth the waters over so that there isn't more conflict. And I've seen people even do that inside themselves, but there is a little bit of overlap. But that sense of I'm in danger and I need to make sure everything's okay. That's a little less usually the case in a social situation where you just want to be accepted. It's not usually like I'm in danger, but it could be, but it's more like I want people to like me. I want to get along. I'm going to put my own needs aside to make sure the group is happy so that I can belong and not feel ostracized and so on. Right.
Well, and how often do we have neurodivergent people with complex trauma?
Right.
This is why this is hard to separate. And, because it's probably both. They're probably doing both. Why is it important? Like, Dana, if we were to step back and be like, why even split the hair? Like, why split the hair on the difference between fawning and masking?
To me, masking is like something, like you said, you decide to do.
It's a tool.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
Fawning, I think of little fawn hiding behind the bushes. It's survival. It's basic. It's like the fight or flight, and it's a basic way to survive. It's to hide, to look cute, to not move, to not even react if all of a sudden someone opens the bushes. You just remain there, and that goes at a deeper, more fear level to me than masking does, which is more deliberate. Like I'm not gonna, talk about elevators or whatever. That is my special interest because people won't like it. Versus, I have to do this or I'm in danger. To me, it goes more of a fundamental, like that fight or flight, which is like there's a neurochemical piece attached to it. Fight or flight, those two, that dichotomy was originally named not so much for psychology as it was for the physiological response of what happens when all of a sudden you get in danger. It's your body either gears up the sympathetic nervous system to get you, amped up, or it amps up that parasympathetic nervous system, which is just to get out, and that takes over after you escape. Adding these other nuances to it is really important because it does sort of bring in mind that frontal lobe that we have, which is more about reasoning, logic, decision making. So it's not so entrenched to do something like masking. Doesn't feel like you're doing those things automatically on a physical level. You're doing them more on a higher order thinking level. Like I want to fit in. I know that people think it's weird if I do X, Y, or Z. It can become automatic if you do it long enough, sure. But it's more of a deliberate, thought out kind of thing than it is on a fundamental, my survival's at stake here, which I think more with fawning, with the definition you gave.
Yeah. Which one feels more like you're in control, right? It's volitional. I use it as a tool. Now, I may not like that I have to use it as a tool. Like, that's different, right? Maybe I get resentful about it, or I get anxious about it, or I'm exhausted about masking. Like, not say, and and that's why I'm often like, where is your safe space where you can unmask, like where you can be yourself and you can just, recoup and recover from the day. Like that's critical, right? So this is why like traveling or traveling with family, or one of my clients went on an RV trip for 30 days. I was like,
Oh
How are you
God.
still family at the end of that? I'm not really
That's like
sure,
a
but
level of Dante's Inferno in my mind. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my
like
God.
that. I
Yeah.
mean, let's analyze the cave all day long,
Yeah.
right? Like that is crazy. But
Yeah.
the fawning aspect, because it is survival, there
Mhm.
is a nervous, like it's like a hit on your nervous system.
It's like your nervous system more than your thinking
Yeah.
system. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So why is that important? It's important because when you are understanding yourself and how to take care of yourself and how
Mhm.
to create a life where you want to wake up the next day for it,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? This anything that is in your blind spot is probably something that I'm going to use the word should
Yeah. Yeah.
uncover
Pay attention
and
to.
look at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so like I talk about work a lot in these endless meetings we go to. So I can decide to not interject a lot and not talk a lot. That could be masking, right?
Mhm.
Fawning might be more now if I feel like I've said something and now I maybe feel like someone's mad at me or I've created conflict and now I sit there and someone says, "Is that okay, Dan?" And I go, "Oh yeah, it's fine." That could be the fawning
Yes.
thing, right? That could go
Yes.
so far to where you get to where you're in that freeze mode and you just don't talk at all. Then to
Yeah.
me, that's what started happening lately. And I'm like, oh crap, it's going all the way to my only recourse now is to just stop completely. And
Yeah.
so if you can be aware of those four ways of being, again, it comes down to awareness. And then when you have awareness, you have decision making. Even if these are somewhat automatic processes, you can
Mhm.
decide then how you're doing it. Like a little kid, fight or flight, boom. As an adult, fully fledged or whatever, you can be hit with that fight or flight, but then you can sort of decide what to do with it, right? I think
Mhm.
about like it's always your head, something around your head or your face. If you hit your head on something, you get that automatic like rage response, like, oh, like you just, it's that fight or flight of, oh my God, my head is so vulnerable on an evolutionary level that you just gear up for, for bear, like I'm in danger, I'm going to do something. Versus if someone does something you don't really like, you could be all geared up and say, oh, wait a minute, my life's not in danger here. I'm going to have a conversation. Right. So you learn over time to control those things, to modulate those things. Maybe control isn't the right word, modulate them, put them in perspective. We know, for example, recent research shows that teenagers go through a whole nother big blast of rewiring of neurons and they lose that capacity for a while, which is why everything just feels like it's the end of the world, super emotions. They don't know what's going on because you're rewiring almost as much as you did when you were a little baby learning the world, and everything's all in upheaval. So if you've gotten to the point where you can modulate things and you can bring in thought, isn't that what we do to deal with trauma? That's what you do with working through trauma. You talk about the trauma, you experience the trauma, and then you reprocess it in the here and now so that you
Mhm.
reframe it, you integrate it, you turn it into something else. And that's basically what we're doing. We're taking a very lower order brain stem activity and we're pulling in the resources of the rest of your brain to make sense of it because you didn't have it when it happened, if it happened on that physical primal level, right? And that's what's
Yeah.
so classic about complex trauma. You don't always have the words to describe or the images to describe what happened. You just talk about this nervous system that's freaked out all the time, and then you can work that through to have it make sense to the rest of your brain and integrate it so that you have the ability to modulate that then later, if that makes sense. Doesn't mean you'll never
Yep.
get triggered, but the trigger you'll be aware of, and you can say, okay, I'm not in danger now. I can choose not to do the fight or flight. I'm okay. And that's something you learn over time with
Yep.
exposure therapy or integration therapy, right?
Yep.
So that's why
Yep.
we split hairs, because how to deal with it, how to deal with masking and how to deal with fawning, I think are very different.
Yep.
You'd approach them differently, which then, treatment's totally different, which is why the splitting hairs is really useful.
Yeah. Yeah. And they look alike.
Yeah.
They
Oh,
can look
totally.
alike.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So split the hair
Hmm.
for the sake of giving yourself more choices and options.
Yeah.
For the sake of and if that feels too overwhelming, because sometimes too many options or too many choices
Right.
can be overwhelming, right?
Yep.
For the sake of feeling like you're kind of in the driver's seat of
Yeah.
yourself
That's right. Exactly.
and not
Yeah.
being towed behind a truck.
Yeah.
Again, I'm just gonna.
You know what? This is, I want to throw it in here. It made me think about this week because you and I have both sort of discovered AI and ChatGPT,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of negatives about it. Yes, of course. But
Yeah.
I just recently realized this week, especially for neurodivergence, it's so helpful because it is sort of like a version of executive functioning.
Yeah.
It helps you organize a thought. It helps you figure out a thought. It helps you stay on
Yeah.
track. So that's what that reminds me of, right? Where you're being dragged behind a car and you're like, okay, wait a minute. I'm laying here letting myself be dragged. Okay. I'm gonna stand up and unhook the chain or something. I still have to attend to my wounds, but I'm not gonna just lay here anymore. And that you have to figure out individually with your therapist to figure out what's going on there. Because if your arms and legs and everything else are bound too, you can't just stand up yet. We have to deal with that first.
Yeah.
And then have you stand up. And it can sometimes take a while. Yeah.
What an image.
Yeah. Oh my God. That'll stick in there. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
welcome, everyone.
But next time you feel stuck and you're down on yourself for being stuck, that image might help you. It's like, wait a minute, I'm bound and gagged and being dragged. I need to figure out something to empower myself. And haven't you run into this as a therapist? If you try to empower someone too soon, it just feels patronizing. It feels like you're not seeing them. So you have to acknowledge it first. Yeah.
It's awful. And you know what?
Mhm.
I've developed a 3-step system for this with my clients, actually, where we, I let my client just talk it out, say it all, say it all, say it all, say it all. And then in the second phase, I reflect. And if it's too soon, we know because they need to correct me.
Yeah.
So we go back to just saying it. And then, the 10 minutes turns into like 2.2 minutes. And then we go to reflection. And if the reflection's not working, we go back and you just keep talking it. And then the third phase is really like, what do we do with this? Like, how do we integrate this information? But I just really simply, like, I lay out those 3 phases with my clients, and I'll just be like, oh, we're back. We need to go back to 1. Like, we need to go back to that first phase, and you need to say it again. Like, you just need, you don't feel validated for this.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be seen in that more. Yeah.
Yeah. But man, as a therapist, and for all you other therapists, psychologists out there, I think that really resonates. You don't move a client sooner than they're ready. And they let you know. And that's not, we used to call this resistance, which is so awful. It's such an awful label.
Yeah.
It's like they have not processed it in the way that they need to process it yet. Like, you've not done your job thoroughly enough. It's on you to go back. And, and this is why traditional therapy sometimes is just does not.
That's what I liked what I learned about in Adlerian therapy, because he said it isn't about resistance. He said it's about therapist-client malalignment. And that would be the therapist wanting to move on and the client's like, oh, I'm not there yet. Yeah, it's a red flag for you're not lined up still. Yeah, which is a better, that's a better way to look at it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a healthier way.
Yeah. So you do have to hang out in the Fawning sometimes. You have to hang out in the.
But Dana, can I just say, is it, when you're an adult, is it deering then? Just kidding. Okay.
Yeah, a whole nother episode. Yeah.
I'm sure the fawning is not actually a fawn. That's why it's not deering.
Yeah. Right.
But it's funny, because maybe you and I will just call it deering from now on.
Yeah. It's endearing. It's December. We're starting to come unglued a little bit.
Bump. Dana and I will be here all day. Okay. All right, everyone. We will see you in the next episode. Be good to you. Bye.